Ernest Jones, president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, close friend of Sigmund Freud. With Dr. Jones is Lionel Trilling.
Dr. Jones, it's a very great pleasure for me to see you here in America and to meet you at last. We've corresponded for a little while, and for many years I've read your books, and the name of Ernest Jones has, of course, been for me most intimately connected with psychoanalysis. And now I am meeting you personally, and I'm delighted by that.
Well, I can reciprocate your kind sentiments quite warmly, Mr. Trilling. I'm very happy indeed, proud to meet you. Your name is as famous in my country as it is in America. You're saying a great deal.
That's very kind of you. I have, of course, as you know, a particular admiration for your first two volumes of your truly monumental biography of Freud. I am looking forward most eagerly to the third and last volume of this great work. You, of course, as the man who has known Freud longest and perhaps most intimately, were peculiarly fated to write his biography. How was it, Dr. Jones, that you first came to know?
To know him personally, you mean, or to be interested in psychoanalysis?
Well, to be interested in psychoanalysis.
Oh, well, that came first, of course. See, I was practicing analysis 3 years before I met him.
Oh.
I've been practicing it now for 51 years. That's longer than anyone else except Dr. Hitchman of Boston, who started the same year. How did I come to take an interest in it? Well, I was the same sort of career as Freud. I was interested in general sociology and philosophy and the meaning of life. And I became a neurologist, thinking if I knew about the brain, I might get the answer to some of these questions. So did he. And we both found out you couldn't get any answers that way. Then I moved on from neurology to psychopathology, interest in hysteria, hypnotism, these mysterious things. And one day I came across an important paper of Freud's.
Which paper was that, Dr. Jones?
The Dora analysis.
Oh, yes.
But I had known his name before, like neurology, for years and years. He actually published a paper in an English periodical, Brain, on the gold chloride method that he'd invented years before. And he was very famous, really, for his work on children paralyses and on aphasia.
He did have an established reputation.
Oh, yes. I mean, a young neurologist knew about his work, you see, quite well. So when I read this other one, it interested me. And what struck me most of all about it was, what an extraordinary man he must be, because he seemed to listen to his patients. And I'd never heard of anybody listening to his patients before. They always tested their knee jerks and that sort of thing, but they didn't listen to what they had to say. And here's a man who listened patiently. Well, that took my fancy very much. And I started to learn German so as to study more of what he had been writing about.
It was how many years after that the American Psychoanalytical Society was founded?
It was 1909. 2 years after that, the first society was founded by Brill, the New York Psychoanalytic Society. And 3 months, I think it was, after that, I founded the American Psychoanalytic Association, which had to cover the whole country, and which now, of course, is a very mighty organization.
That you founded in Baltimore?
Yeah, yes, we held a little meeting. I called together a little meeting. There were half a dozen men in Baltimore.
Well, when was the English Psychoanalytical Society formed?
A couple of years after that again. I went back to England in 1913 and founded there the British Psychoanalytical Society. And, of course, after the war, that developed very much. Freud himself attended the first 2 congresses after the war, but in the next year, 1923, he was smitten with this terrible cancer and was unable to attend any congress after that.
It was cancer of the mouth or jaw, was it?
Yes, between the jaw and the cheek, upper jaw and the cheek.
And it was extraordinarily painful.
Extraordinarily painful. He suffered agonies at various times. Think now, that went on for 16 years. He had 23 operations in that time, major operations, with all sorts of things being done in between in the way of radium or X-rays or diathermy or different things to torture him, you may say, and manufacturing complicated dentures. Well, he's really never free of discomfort and mostly of pain. 16 years, which he bore with exemplary fortitude, resignation, quietness. Only once in all that time ever heard him complaining. And that was when he was really, it was almost unbearable. And he said, oh, this is really unnecessary.
When Freud died at 83, Dr. Jones, his life work was done. It was a great life work. What would you say was the most important and significant element in it?
Well, I think in one word, his discovery and exploration of the unconscious part of the mind, which showed that the mind contained more than people used to think. There was an unknown territory in the mind, buried, what Freud called repressed, which was unwelcome and inadmissible to our conscious mind.
And how did he come to his discovery of this?
Of that? Well, by his work partly on the neuroses of his patients and partly on the dreams of his patients and himself. The cases he had to deal with were of hysteria. Let us say a person has a phobia, claustrophobia, terrified to go into a subway or into a church or any closed place for fear they might suffocate. Quite an unreasonable fear, apparently meaningless fear, and that is the point. He found out the meaning of things where people didn't know anything about them before. Well, he discovered that the meaning of these curious phobias, fears, and obsessions was that they were what he called compromises between different conflicting tendencies in the mind that were incompatible with each other. There'd be a striving, a drive in a deep part of the mind that wasn't allowed to be admitted. There'd be the repression of that, and the phobia would emerge as a sort of substitute of both, without the person knowing what on earth it meant, or without the doctor knowing what on earth it meant.
And the process of psychoanalysis was to find out what these manifestations meant.
Yes, what they meant and what their driving force and motive were. I mentioned dreams just now because, curiously enough, dreams are built on a very similar pattern to neuroses. They also are apparently a jumble of some meaningless nonsense, and yet they turn out on investigation to be the disguised presentation of hidden mental processes, drives, hopes, fears, and so on, which have been not allowed to come straight through, but have been disguised and turned into these meaningless images we get in our sleep through all sorts of particular mechanisms. Things are symbolized, things are jammed together, things are separated, things are twisted, a whole lot of special mechanisms, all of which he elucidated and described in great detail to show how these changes are brought about from the original unconscious material and the surface thing that we call a dream or call a neurotic symptom.
Then, Dr. Jones, according to Freud, there was no manifestation of the mental life, no matter how irrational or absurd it might seem, that was actually without some meaning.
Yes, that's a very fundamental discovery of his, you may say. It applied not only to these meaningless things like dreams and neurotic symptoms, but to things that previously hadn't been noticed. pass by as having no meaning. Suppose a person forgets to post a letter, or makes a slip of the tongue, or slip of the pen, or mislays something, can't find it. All slips of all kinds that happen to us, no doubt, many times a day. Usually they're passed by saying, well, they're accidents. They have no meaning. They just happened. Well, now, Freud wrote a book on that subject, which is very interesting. Psychopathology of Everyday Life, he called it. And he showed that each one of these has a precise meaning and is the result of a conflict between diverging tendencies in the mind, one interfering with the other. And you say, well, how do they all begin? Why should we have all these conflicts? Well, they begin very early in life, and that's a very big story. Infants come to the world not as civilized beings, but as creatures who've inherited some pretty wild ancestral traits of savagery, of hatred, of other emotions which are pretty violent and which they can't express or understand, and they've got to learn to be tamed. These things are in conflict with the general cultural attitude, and they've got to be learned to be civilized. I think you could say that a child has to pass in the first 2 or 3 years of life through 50,000 years of evolution, and it's not easy going for that child. No wonder that very few children get through without scars left from the struggles to become civilized.
Well, could you say, Dr. Jones, that the conflicts between primal impulses and civilization?
Broadly speaking, yes. But they play themselves out on the stage of the relationship to the immediate environment, usually the parents. Maybe a parent substitute, comes to the same thing. In other words, the loves, hatreds, sexual impulses, needs, desires, drives, naturally concern the person nearest to them, mother, father, and it is in that relationship, people whom they're supposed to love and obey and be on friendly terms with, that these things are fought out without the parents realizing what's going on, except that the children are troublesome, they have tantrums, and they won't eat, and they this, that, and the other. They wet the bed, and they have all sorts of troubles, which often annoy the parents, of course. But that is part of the inevitable effort of the child to become civilized.
Well, if conflict is the essence of neurosis, it could also be said to be the essence of the life of everyone.
Undoubtedly.
Living.
Undoubtedly. Everyone has to go through this process, and they emerge in different ways. Some solve some of these conflicts by expressing them in neurotic symptoms. Others develop peculiar character traits, or very obstinate, or very tyrannical, or troublesome in various ways, quarrelsome, and so on, which are efforts to express these difficult unconscious drives, which helps them more or less, although they may cause a lot of practical trouble in life.
Well, what would you say is the distinction between what you are calling troublesome character traits and actual neuroses?
And neuroses? Well, really only a technical medical difference. There's no important psychological difference. You mean in normal people?
Yes.
Yes, but I haven't met any normal people. That's the trouble.
No normal people?
I don't know anything about them. No, everybody I meet, I can always find neurotic symptoms in, quite evidently.
Well, then, could you say that the normal situation of man is to endure neurotic symptoms?
If you like to call it that. Anyhow, to endure conflicts and struggles and the fear of these buried impulses. Man is haunted by fear without knowing it. Haunted, struggling desperately, trying to hide it, trying to get away from it, trying to build up defenses against it, struggling with it all the time. Most of our life is made up in that sort of way. It's searching for security.
What part, Dr. Jones, do parents play in this situation?
Well, less than generally thought. You must remember that these difficulties and struggles of the child are an inevitable result of their primordial nature. It can be affected, of course, by outside influences, as you suggest, but not so much as I think popularly is believed.
You know, Dr. Jones, how much American parents have been indoctrinated by theories of child rearing and child training, and these have had, as it were, kind of Freudian basis. It seems to me that a great many parents have been led to feel a very intense guilt about their responsibility to their children. They feel that they are sure to have done something wrong, that any manifestation in the child that seems untoward is the result of some failure of theirs. I think they even come to feel that psychoanalysis constitutes a kind of accusation of them.
Yes, I see. Well, it's a little more complicated than it looks. I know, of course, about this response of theirs of guilt. But, you know, a good deal of that comes from inside themselves. They see the children going through difficulties that they had gone through themselves when they were children, and they copy the child's reactions, both of anxiety and of guilt. So a lot of the guilt they feel about upbringing, the upbringing of their children, is really the guilt about their own upbringing, that they ought to have done better when they started life.
But they do, of course, respond with a great deal of confusion and upset and fluster to what they see in their children, faults of temper or temperament, and very often they don't know how to respond at all.
Well, of course, they very often get excited and frightened. And that, again, is part of the child's reaction. They're really imitating the child. They are frightened at the appearance of these impulses of anger and hatred and so on that the child is showing, tantrums or whatnot. And, and it's the worst thing they can do from the point of view of the child.
Yes, of course, there is a situation in which there are actual troubles that the child is experiencing, and then one does want to know whether the parents can be of any specific help to the child.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I think on the whole, not so very much in active ways, as is generally thought. Much more in negative ways of refraining from certain things. As I was saying just now, refraining from anxiety. The three things a parent has to show in the attitude towards the child in order to help the child is to have as little anxiety as possible, to show love, and to show patience. So that when these things happen, the parent's not flustered, excited, worried, because when they are, the child's fears are confirmed. The child says, my God, yes, I knew I was in a dangerous situation, while mother's frightened too.
Yes. Then calm and understanding would seem to be the key to the right behavior in relation to children.
That goes a very long way.
But that does happen, I'm sure, many occasions when the child goes beyond any help that the parent can give it in understanding and security. Don't you think this must often happen?
Yes, I think you get a long way if you have calm, firmness, patience, love, and in order to produce that, the mother or father have to be happy themselves, and they've got to be happy with each other. In other words, a happy marriage gives the children the best chance possible. An unhappy marriage is about the worst thing a child can have. So the whole question of married relations is opened up by this problem. One that in America you seem to think you can solve by easy divorces, but I don't believe that is the real answer.
And yet, Dr. Jones, there must be situations of childhood unhappiness and misery and confusion in which the security, love, and understanding that parents can give the child are not sufficient.
Yes, unfortunately there are, quite often. But then it's naturally occurred to some of us that we might be able to do something more actively to help the child. Why wait for this child to grow up and develop neurotic symptoms and then be analyzed when it's of an age? Can't we do something at the time to help it with its difficulties? And there have been pioneering work done in that direction. The names of Anna Freud and Melanie Klein are especially associated with that work, with very successful, helpful results. On the other hand, of course, there are not a great number of child analysts in the whole world, and so what can be done is limited on that account. But the people who have understanding of these principles, have been analyzed themselves, can help the parents. And as you know, a great deal is being done now, especially in America, with these child guidance clinics and other institutions where specially trained psychiatrists with knowledge and understanding of psychoanalytical principles can give advice and guidance without actually psychoanalyzing the child at length or thoroughly or deeply. And that's often very, very helpful.
So that even those who cannot afford the expense of analysis can have the help of psychoanalytical insights.
Sure.
It seems to me that there is scarcely one of the intellectual disciplines, one of the disciplines in which university people work, such as sociology or anthropology or study of art, theology, which has not come in one way or another to psychoanalysis for the help which its insights do give. You yourself, Dr. Jones, are very widely known for a study that you did of Hamlet a good many years ago, in which you've issued in several revisions over the years. It's recently been very widely sold in America in the latest revision of it. How did you begin on this study of Hamlet?
Well, from the broad hint that Freud had given in one of his books about the solution of the problem, that problem of Hamlet, which has been called the great mystery of literature, one of the seven seals of literature, why Hamlet was not able to do the things he wanted to do and felt he ought to do, and yet couldn't bring himself to do, and went on dithering and dithering until he wound up in a pretty unholy mess.
And your answer to that is
The answer was that he was held up by an unconscious sense of guilt. When he said, conscience doth make cowards of us all, he meant, of course, bad conscience. And that bad conscience, which we all have in our hearts, is what we start with in infancy, or we can call it a sense of guilt. It's another name for it. From that should develop our good conscience, meaning our sense of responsibility, our moral attitude towards problems of life. Good. But when it remains on this irrational sense of inferiority or guilt, it's very much the same thing, well, then it holds people up.
And you might say that unconscious guilt is the great preventer of our best intentions. You could say that really that it is the thing that most wastefully consumes our psychic energy.
Well, that puts it very well, I think. Yes. Of course, that unconscious guilt isn't the beginning of it. It isn't the primary thing. Where does it come from? Why should it be there? That guilt is a response to the deep fears in the human heart, to what we call the anxieties constantly haunting the human heart. The guilt was probably one of the defenses that the mind built up against these anxieties. So the point is the fear in the human heart of its own nature, meaning of its own primordial, buried impulses, hostile, savage, murderous, sexual, cannibalistic, all sorts of things that we are born with, that are in the infantile mind, which is very much synonymous, as we've seen, with the unconscious mind, and with which we all have to struggle.
Then could you say that The function of psychoanalysis is to make these unconscious anxieties and fears of the infantile or unconscious mind conscious so that they can be dealt with in a rational way.
Yes, I think, putting it very simply, that is so.
Do you know, Dr. Jones, because psychoanalysis can do this much, many people have come to think that it can do a great deal more, that it can really do everything. They've come to think of it as a kind of panacea for all of life's ills and as providing a way for perfect happiness in life.
Well, that it certainly can't do. It doesn't pretend to do. I think it can do something, though, bigger even than that. The knowledge of psychoanalysis makes us take a wider view, not only of the individual and his troubles, but of the nature of man. It realizes that man is a creature with a very troublesome inheritance from a distant past, who is a struggling creature, and still is. Probably man got on fairly well when he lived alone in the forest or in small groups. But in the last 10,000 years, he's tried to live in communities and build up some sort of civilization. And he's accomplished wonderful things in that time. But on the whole, I don't know that you could say he's made a very good job of it. At all events, he could do very much more if he gets a better understanding of what problems face him and what holds him up. After all, we still have constant tortures all over the world, concentration camps, dictatorships, wars, horrible things, murders, killings, international friction, personal friction with each other. We don't get along anything like as well as we should like to with each other. And we've tried many things to help us control our wild, primitive nature. We've had governments, we've had religions, all sorts of religions, morality, ideologies of different sorts, some illusory, some helpful, but we've a long way yet to go. We have to face life and shed a great many illusions that we've clutched at to help us on our path through life. Psychoanalysis, therefore, portends a hard path, stony path. It cannot pretend that life is easy, that life has no pain, that life has no difficulties, that life has no troubles. Its final message is that life is something to be endured on a basis of reality.
This conversation between Dr. Ernest Jones and Lionel Trilling took place in the library of the New York Psychoanalytic Society and Institute on the occasion of the Society's centennial Freud lecture.